Almost a year had passed since the Crusaders had taken the tower in the Nile, and still Damietta remained inviolate. The catapults on the walls hurled their deadly payloads less frequently, and most of what came tumbling out of the sky was loose rock. The stores of the alchemical fire had long been emptied. The defenders hurled rocks at the Christian war parties without much enthusiasm, as if their efforts were expected as part of the dialogue of war, but they had no heart for it any longer. The Crusaders had little heart left for the siege either. Over the last 6 months, it had become apparent to John of Brienne and the few noblemen who stood with him that Damietta held little military value. As difficult as it was for the Christians to get in, it would be equally difficult for them to get out again, especially if the Sultan's armies filled up the floodplain behind them. Safaddin, the man who had been Sultan when the crusade began, had died shortly after the tower assault. His son, Al-Kamil, who had been ruler of Egypt when the crusade began, now held sway over the entirety of the Muslim domain. While his father remembered some of the atrocities of the previous crusade and never relented in his desire to drive the Christians out of the Levant, his son appeared to have a different perspective. He had offered, more than once, terms of peace that seemed too good to be true. The legate from Rome, Pelagius, believed this offer of peace was a lie, facile words offered by a heathen who could not be trusted. Rome wanted Damietta, he insisted, and Rome would have the city. Of the original company of shield brethren who had joined the crusade at Acre, only 18 remained. Of those, 4 could still carry arms, and would do so at a moment's notice, but they would not ride to meet the enemy. The enemy would have to come to them. Eptor, the farmer's son who had charged across the narrow bridge with Raphael, was one of those 4. The wounds still plaguing him were not physical. His body had healed, and his spirit remained resolute, but his mind was dimmed by the presence of a shadow. At first he had merely been prone to fevers, but as the winter passed, his bouts of night sweats gave way to more disturbing signs. Eptor began to speak of their dead brothers as if they were still alive. Raphael, with whom the stricken farmer's son had formed an unshakable bond, was tasked with keeping his ailing comrade within the clutch of shield brethren tents. While the shield brethren did not abandon one of their own, regardless of his mental condition, there would be others in the Christian camp who would not be as tolerant of their brother's disturbed speech. "The last thing this morale-stricken camp needs is a rumor of witchcraft and demonic possession," Calpurnius had instructed Raphael. "Keep him and us safe." The task had been fairly simple at first, in that Eptor was more than happy to follow Raphael like a faithful dog. And then the priest, Francis of Assisi, the founder of the Ordo Fratrum Minorum, arrived, and his revolutionary exhortation for peace changed everything. It was not uncommon to see John of Brienne walking through the Christian camp. Though he was king of Jerusalem, he had never sat in its throne. His marriage to Maria of Montferrat had been one of political expediency, and his dowry had been the privilege of leading the Christian crusaders in their vain effort to retake the Holy Lands. Sir John governed from the ranks, listening to complaints of the men-at-arms, attending to the needs of the landed nobility who made up the bulk of the Christian cavalry, sitting and discussing tactics with the noble lords from France, Frisia, and England, and strategizing the best use of the diminishing number of knights from the 3 military orders. The Crusaders all knew him by sight, and while he allowed them to show some deference, he insisted on no title other than the one warranted by his numerous feats of arms. It was curious, then, for him to present himself anonymously at the Shield Brethren camp, wrapped in a nondescript cloak and hood. Most of the Shield Brethren were drilling with the Templars, a mock display of martial readiness meant to confuse any Muslim scouts that might be observing the Christian camp from the south. Raphael and Eptor were engaged in the tedious but necessary task of repairing mail when the mysterious figure approached. Setting aside his tools, Raphael rose to greet the visitor and was shocked to recognize the face peering out from within the shadows of the hood.